Jabber starts breathing heavily and gets a crazy pump on his arm. Suddenly, he lets out a powerful scream and charges at high speed toward Rudo. Rudo becomes surprised by his power and worries that he might get caught in the crossfire. He tries to run away, but Jabber cuts him off and begins attacking. Rudo attempts to extend the Jinky to block the attack, but it fails. Rudo quickly grabs Jabber and throws him away. Jabber starts getting up and lets out another scream. Rudo notices that the poison really did make Jabber lose consciousness and feels shocked that Jabber figured out his Jinky's weakness so quickly. He feels uneasy seeing Jabber's commitment and concludes that he is highly experienced. Rudo thinks back to a few things Jabber said earlier during their fight and wonders if Jabber might be what people call a super masochist. He recalls a moment when someone called him a masochist for not fighting back and remembers asking Retro what the term meant. While Rudo is lost in thought, Jabber charges at high speed to attack again. Rudo becomes confused about how to defeat a masochist. Jabber jumps around and strikes at Rudo, but Rudo manages to jump away. Jabber tries to attack again, and just as he is about to break through Rudo's defense, a weapon thwarts his attack and pins him to the ground. Rudo looks at the weapon and recognizes it as the one holding Jabber down. Zanka steps forward visibly annoyed and questions why Jabber would fight with Rudo when he hasn't beaten him yet. He then tells Rudo to step aside so he can teach Jabber a lesson. However, Jabber suddenly collapses to the ground, and Rudo notices that Zanka looks awful. Zanka insists that he is fit as a fiddle and observes that Rudo can finally use the vital instrument properly. Rudo explains that his vital instrument is no longer working since his enemy is unconscious and how he even struggles to dodge attacks. Zanka points out that the vital instrument reacts to hostility and mentions that he was evaluating Rudo's battle earlier. Zanka knows that he cannot move well because of the poison used on him earlier and comes up with a plan. He shockingly suggests an idea to hit Rudo, and Rudo becomes surprised by the idea. Zanka explains that if he attacks Rudo, the vital instrument might react by moving him, and since his weapon has more reach than Rudo's fists, he should be able to strike the enemy before Jabber's claws can. Rudo hesitates and points out that if the plan fails, he will be the one getting hit. Zanka dismisses the concern and says he can just shake it off. Suddenly, Jabber begins to get up and immediately attacks, slicing through a pillar where both Rudo and Zanka are standing. Both of them dodge the attack, and Zanka warns Rudo not to let the claws touch him, as even a small prick is enough to immobilize him. Zanka suddenly turns to Rudo and takes a swing at him. Rudo's vital instrument reacts and moves Zanka, allowing him to strike Jabber. Rudo becomes shocked that Zanka attacked him for real. Zanka steps around Rudo and swings at him again. As expected, the vital instrument moves Rudo, giving Zanka another chance to land a solid hit on Jabber. Zanka notices that Rudo can extend the flight distance when the instrument moves him, but comments that it feels rough. Rudo reveals that he does not want the movement to be smooth. Zanka tries to attack Rudo again, while asking him to show some appreciation. Suddenly, Jabber regains his senses, and Zanka knocks him down to the ground with his weapon. Zanka collapses to the ground and feels relieved that the fight is finally over. He becomes exhausted from the battle, and suddenly notices Rudo's vital instrument beginning to crumble. Zanka wonders if there is a time limit on the weapons that Rudo has weaponized. Rudo starts shaking and blames himself for what happened. Zanka notices Rudo acting strangely and sees him fall to the ground while breathing heavily. He spots a wound on Rudo's back and questions when he got scratched by the claws. Suddenly, Jabber pokes himself with his left claw and gets back on his feet. He walks over to Zanka and admits that he doesn't know what happened while he was unconscious, but feels satisfied with the results. Zanka becomes confused about how Jabber is still fine after all the hits they landed on him. Jabber explains that when he uses the left claw with the right amount of toxin, the pain disappears. He adds that using too much can be troublesome, so he saves it for people he wants to kill. He further reveals that using the poison on his right claw lasts only 10 minutes on him, but Zanka's will wear off in about 30 minutes. Jabber decides to stab Zanka again and slowly approaches Rudo. He picks up Rudo and expresses his desire to see Zanka again. Rudo remains conscious but paralyzed and starts feeling guilty, thinking that everything is his fault. Jabber jumps with Rudo up a floor through a hole in the ceiling and becomes confused about why he is outside when it should be inside a building. Riyo stands nearby and spots him. A familiar umbrella strikes Jabber and launches him away, forcing him to let go of Rudo. Enjin and several other givers arrive looking ready to fight, and Enjin remarks that the place needs a good cleaning. They notice that the hole goes deep underground, and Enjin comments that the enemy's plan to disable their communicators is typical of a bad guy. He praises the supporter who escaped for finding a phone and contacting them. The supporter expresses concern about whether Gris and the others are okay. Enjin reassures her by stating that the others are not weak and instructs her to take some people to help their friends. Jabber gets up and notices the group of givers looking at him like he is trash. Enjin asks Rudo if this is the guy he was fighting since he seems a bit crazy. Riyo feels relieved that Rudo looks better than she expected, but Tamsi contradicts her by pointing out that Rudo is barely breathing. Delmon becomes enraged at the thought of someone doing this to his comrades. Enjin expresses his desire to ask Jabber a lot of questions and makes it clear that he will not go easy on him for messing with his comrades. Jabber realizes he is in a bad situation and feels an overwhelming urge to run, but remains determined to follow his orders to bring Rudo back. He refuses to return until he completes his mission and declares that he does not care if he loses or even dies. Jabber prepares to lunge at them, but someone suddenly grabs him from behind. Jabber recognizes the person as Kutoni, who insists that they should go back. Jabber refuses and remains focused on completing his mission to take the Skyperson with him. Enjin wonders where the girl appeared from, and Kutoni whispers to him that the boss was smiling from ear to ear. Jabber makes a creepy smile after hearing this, and Riyo notices a manhole on the wall behind their enemies. Before leaving, Jabber reveals that he had a lot of fun playing with Rudo, even though he is a Skyperson. Suddenly, Rudo shouts from the ground, telling Jabber to wait because they are not done yet. He declares that it is not over until he pays Jabber back for what he did to Gris many times over. Jabber starts laughing and notices a familiar series on Rudo's hand. He guesses that the design might be a coincidence and remarks that his boss would be happy to hear about it. Kutoni jumps through the manhole in the wall, and Jabber reveals his intention to play with Rudo again. The manhole cover closes and disappears from the wall. The givers watch as they leave, and Rudo looks at his hand confused about what Jabber meant by the series on it. The givers exit the building after retrieving Zanka and Gris with Ladder on a stretcher. Rudo runs over to Gris and apologizes for breaking his amulet. Gris admits that it was very important to him, but feels glad that it helped Rudo. He praises Rudo for doing a good job. Meanwhile, Rudo sits alone outside the cleaner's headquarters. Enjin joins him and comments on the long face he has. He praises Rudo for being able to use his vital instrument properly, but Rudo interrupts and questions what kind of face he is supposed to have after Gris got injured. He feels guilty for not being able to help the person who helped him and laments that the same things keep happening even though he has made progress. Enjin tells Rudo that Gris was prepared to risk his life to protect his comrades, and that he protected Rudo because he sees him as a comrade, not just a Skyperson. Enjin gets up and tells Rudo to show his face to Gris. They head inside, and Rudo is stunned to see Gris sitting and looking completely fine. Gris congratulates Rudo on awakening his power. Rudo stares in disbelief and feels surprised that Gris is alive. Enjin and another giver console Rudo after realizing how depressed he had been. Rudo becomes agitated and explains that he was confused since they said Gris was deeply wounded, so he thought he had died. Gris thanks the medical team for his recovery and introduces Ishia Stilza, who is the only healer giver in the cleaners. Ishia quietly mentions that she just happened to be of help, and Enjin tells Rudo that Ishia is a very shy person. Gris then speaks to Follow and advises him that he cannot be a giver if he is too impatient. He encourages Follow to take things at his own pace, and Follow starts crying while holding Gris tightly. Gris praises Rudo and Zanka again for doing a great job cornering such a strong opponent. Rudo feels relieved and glad that Gris is still alive. Enjin reveals that they now have to worry about both Trash Beasts and the Raiders since they have started an all-out fight with the cleaners. Enjin begins to share some new information, and suddenly another giver walks in. The giver talks about the border that the Raiders mentioned and explains that it means the Raiders are investigating the sphere as well. Rudo looks at the giver and wonders who he is, as Enjin calls him boss. Rudo realizes that the man is the boss of the cleaners. The man introduces himself as Arkha Corvus, the head of the cleaners. He recalls hearing that Rudo wants to find a way back to the sphere. He initially thought Rudo was only there for information and states that he does not want people like that in the cleaners. But after seeing Rudo risk his life to protect his comrades and noticing his useful ability, he officially welcomes Rudo into the cleaners. Later, they head to the boss's office, and Corvus explains that the border is what lies between the sphere and the ground. He reveals that anyone who tries to cross the border to reach the sphere ends up dying. The boss shares a story about a woman in the no man's land who is said to be the closest to the border. He explains that the woman once helped a traveler who ended up in the no man's land, and when asked why she was there, she responded that she sees people coming down from above. She had lived there for years and claimed that there is someone who can go up and down without dying. Corvus speculates that the woman may have seen a person capable of crossing the border. Rudo understands that finding finding the woman could help him discover a way back to the sphere. Corvus becomes interested in learning how Rudo survived and warns him that following this path will be extremely dangerous. Rudo firmly declares that there is no doubt he is going back to the sphere. Enjin walks into the office and notices Rudo wearing a cleaner's uniform. He comments that the uniform is looking good on him. Meanwhile, Zanka starts shaking nervously after noticing something pushing its way through a door. The scene jumps back to 6 hours earlier, where Follow pleads with Rudo to stop him for trying to find the woman in the no man's land. Rudo remains firm and refuses to stop until he finds the woman who might know how to return to the sphere. Enjin quickly shuts down Rudo's argument and questions if he has a death wish for wanting to go to such a dangerous place without being prepared or understanding the limits of his own power. Enjin insists on learning all the details about Rudo's abilities and urges him to be aware of the weaknesses of his power. Rudo asks if Enjin will come with him, and Enjin responds that it would be suicide to go into the no man's land alone. He explains that the cleaners are not only tasked with destroying trash beasts, but also collecting information about them. Enjin warns that they also need to keep an eye out for the raiders. This prompts Rudo to ask how raiders can become givers. Enjin explains that even bad people like raiders have something that means a lot to them, and becoming a giver has nothing to do with whether a person is good or bad. He adds that people often look down on givers because people see it as creepy when givers are so obsessed with a single object. Rudo reflects on what Enjin said and realizes he was unfair for assuming bad people wouldn't take care of their things. Despite this, Rudo still wants to make the raiders pay for their mistakes. Enjin advises him to chill out for the day. Rudo lies down in his room trying to chill, but keeps thinking about wanting to go trash picking. Suddenly, Riyo slams his door open and startles him. She offers to show him around the cleaner's headquarters and quickly flies through the tour, showing him the training room, dining hall, and bathroom. Rudo is shocked to see so many things he never had on the sphere. Riyo wonders what life was like on the sphere, and Rudo informs that he would go with Recto to see scenery, find trash, and get bullied. Riyo starts laughing and reassures him that there are bullies down here as well. She asks if he ever had desserts before, and Rudo responds that only rich people could afford them. Riyo reveals that they have desserts bought from the vianders on the ground. In the cafeteria, Enjin sits nearby and asks if they came just to eat desserts. He warns that the desserts are more addictive than drugs on the ground. Rudo is stunned by the amount of desserts presented to him. Enjin explains that pollution makes it hard to grow plants, but the vianders have givers specialized in preparing food. Rudo takes a bite of one of the desserts and screams in surprise at how good it tastes. He keeps munching on all the desserts when someone suddenly approaches their table. Another giver with a pacifier stares intensely at Rudo. Rudo assumes the person wants some of the desserts and reluctantly offers a candy. The giver snatches it and puts his hand out, expecting more. This angers Rudo, and someone quickly pulls the giver away. The scene shifts back to the present, where Zanka overhears both Enjin and Riyo talking about how Rudo emptied their stock of desserts. Zanka wonders if Rudo caused trouble again, and suddenly he starts shaking nervously after seeing something bursting through the doorway. Rudo pops out of the door looking very bloated. Zanka gets startled and yells that there's a weird outsider inside their headquarters. Meanwhile, Rudo tries to use his vital instrument power on a knife, but fails to activate it. Zanka wonders if Rudo can no longer use his vital instrument. Enjin teases Rudo by saying he became too obsessed with desserts and forgot how to use his powers. Rudo gets confused on why his powers are not working, even though he still remembers how to use them. Zanka thinks for a moment and theorizes that Rudo's ability might only react to trash or broken objects. They bring a pile of random broken items, and Zanka tells Rudo to pick something from the pile. Rudo excitedly goes through the trash and picks up a triangle-shaped frame. He quickly activates his ability, and the frame turns into a weapon. Enjin praises Zanka for figuring out Rudo's abilities and comments that he always knew Zanka was a good trainer. Zanka gets flustered hearing Enjin's praise, but tries to hide his happiness. Zanka advises Rudo to practice weaponizing multiple items in a row. Rudo uses his powers on several objects, but suddenly gets a nosebleed. Enjin recalls the last time Rudo had a nosebleed after using several instruments in a row. He explains that while the quality of Rudo's gloves is great, Rudo's body cannot keep up with his powers. He informs that if more time is spent treating an item with care, it will become a better vital instrument with improved quality. Zanka wonders why Rudo's gloves are affecting his body so much and suspects it might have something to do with the series on his gloves. Rudo asks why the weaponized items fall apart after being used, and Riyo guesses that it happens because the items no longer have any regrets. She adds that the items starts crumbling after they fulfilled their role. Zanka confirms this theory, since the items fall apart after Rudo feels safe. Enjin concludes that Rudo's ability might draw out the full worth of trash and broken objects to fulfill their purpose. He reassures Rudo by saying that he didn't destroy Griss's lucky charm, but instead used the remaining fight left in it. Rudo understands that his ability is not about destroying things, but about helping them fulfill their purpose. Riyo asks Rudo about the series connected to his gloves. Rudo wonders if this means there are more series out there. Riyo follows up by asking if Rudo has given his gloves a name, and Rudo admits that he hasn't thought about naming them yet. Meanwhile, Jabber reaches his hideout and meets with his boss. He mentions several phrases like the City of Arts and Desert Altar, along with Rudo. Meanwhile, Rudo washes his gloves in the sink and feels a stinging sensation in his hands. He heads to his room and becomes shocked to find Riyo lying on his bed. She wonders why Rudo is still awake and reminds him that they will be leaving tomorrow. Rudo stands stunned and questions why she is in his room and how she got there. Riyo casually reveals that her room is just above his and she came through the window. Rudo panics at the thought of a girl on his bed, and Riyo notices Rudo's hands. She asks if his hands are hurting, and Rudo explains that they don't hurt when the gloves are on, but he has to wash them sometimes. Riyo observes that his hands don't look like burns, and Rudo remarks that he would have to ask his dad to find out more about his hands. Riyo sits up and comments that parents give us both good and bad things. Meanwhile, Enjin and Gris stand outside a room as loud clanging sounds come from inside. Enjin explains to Rudo that givers must wear full-face preparations when heading to the no man's land. He reveals that they have an artiste who makes the masks, but often procrastinates when given a deadline and ends up getting nothing done. Corvus decides to get some magic charms for Rudo. Semiyu explains that the no man's land is unpredictable, and it is common to get killed by trash beasts. She adds that they will use a certain giver to cast a spell that can draw on their powers. Rudo asks where they are going, and Enjin responds that their destination is the City of Graffiti, also known as Canvas Town. Enjin introduces Rudo to the team of givers who will assist him in the search for the Lady of the No Man's Land. From the Gachiakuta group, there is Zanka, Riyo, and Enjin. From the Eager group, there is Delmon and Tamsi. And also supporters including Gris, Follow, and Tome are also part of the team. Enjin explains that they usually have 5 supporters, but since they are traveling to the No Man's Land, they are bringing fewer supporters and more givers. Delmon calls out to Rudo and acknowledges the pain he has gone through. He vows not to forgive those who harm his comrades and reveals that he admires people who are passionate. He asks if Rudo is interested in joining the Eager group. Tamsi steps in to stop Delmon and explains that Rudo belongs to the Gachiakuta group since Enjin brought him in. He also tells Rudo that he likes passionate people too. Suddenly, Delmon shouts that they are heading to Canvas Town and delivers an intense speech about never giving up, no matter how difficult the mission, because they are cleaners. Everyone joins in with the same intensity and shouts together. They all calmly sit in the car, ready to start their mission.